Hello, welcome back. Christopher Taylor, Sovereign Harmony. Thanks for joining me again. It's been a little while. I think my last video was early March 9th, I believe. And today is Monday, May 14th, I believe it is. Getting on through the springtime now. So I wanted to go over some big shifts that are coming on up. So first we're going to review a little bit where we've been, where I left you last, etc. But first, it's actually the first sunny day here in Carlsbad, California in a little while. We've had a little of the May gray, as they call it around here. Gets a little cloudy, drizzly, and whatnot, but today is actually kind of a picture-perfect day. You can probably tell, probably about 68 degrees and sunny, something like that. Really nice. And you might notice me here, if you've watched my videos in the past, I've been letting my hair grow out a little bit. So this is about 6 months of growth. It's not something I've ever really done. So I'm just kind of going with it. It's growing it. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it, but we'll see where it lands. So it's my California surfer dude look, something I've never done before. But anyway, apparently I have curly hair, or it gets curly when it gets long. I never knew. How would you know, right? But back on point. So when I left us last, this was back in early March. Mercury was just about to, it just entered its shadow zone for the retrograde that happened in late March into mid-April. Okay, and so I went over, what that Mercury retrograde in Aries is going to be about, and it was all about essentially coming to our own wisdom, and that shadow period's over now. It's been over for about a week and a half. So in early May, Mercury finally exited its shadow. So that whole area of our life, whatever part of our chart that was in, went through that review period, and it was really a review to really come into our own in terms of what we think separate from what other people think is good for us, for example. So making decisions for us, even if it's unorthodox, even if it's strange to us even, but it's what we need to do for ourselves. So a lot of self-counsel has come into play over the last couple of months. So that leaves us in a space where we're kind of ready now for this next phase, okay? And so that Mercury retrograde was in Aries, and Mercury actually just exited Aries just a couple days ago. Before doing so, it joined Uranus at the last degree of Aries, 29 degrees Aries. And Uranus at the last degree of Aries is about to cross the threshold literally tomorrow morning, Tuesday morning, May 15th. Uranus will enter Taurus, and that's a pretty big deal. It takes about 84 years for Uranus to go around the zodiac once. The last time Uranus was in Taurus, this was the mid-1930s into the early 1940s. So to give you some perspective of how often these things happen. It will back into Aries again later in this fall for several months before it enters Taurus for good. In other words, for the duration of its tenure there, which will be all the way through 2026. So this is these transits of Uranus are long. Uranus has been in Aries, and you probably heard me talk about this in previous videos if you've watched them, since 2010. So 2010 it first entered Aries, backed into Pisces a bit, and then in 2011 it was officially in Aries until literally tomorrow. So it's been in Aries since 2011 until tomorrow. It's been a time related to this Mercury retrograde we just had in Aries, with Uranus and Aries this whole time, these last several years, going back to 2010, 2011, of really, again, defining our own unique individuality, our sovereignness, and in the process, some of us experiencing some alienation and some sense of separating from our tribes, families, whatever we identified with in a group sense, really coming into our uniqueness, our unique input, our unique talents, skills, creative abilities, and us as a sovereign being connected to the universal whole, without the proof of it through others. That comfort of connecting superficially, in the authenticity of connecting universally, so that we can connect less superficially in our actual world with other people. So we can't create balanced, healthy relationships if we are not whole and complete ourselves. And that's really what Uranus and Aries has been, and it's again just about over here. We'll have a few months here in the fall into the early spring of 2019, but for the most part, the next 8 years features Uranus and Taurus. Okay, so it's a different kind of energy. So we're essentially finishing up the process of defining ourselves. And this Mercury retrograde in Aries was really the capstone of this. And it really was a preview of, okay, how have we come along these last 7 to 8 years? How have we come into our own, okay? And it's just interesting to note that along with Uranus's shift into Taurus, which I will get back to in terms of the significance, I want to address the fact that Mars, which goes retrograde once every 2 years, the last time was the spring of 2016, and so it hasn't gone retrograde since then, and it's about to go retrograde. It actually just entered its shadow period on Saturday the 12th. So just a couple days ago, Mars entered its shadow, and this is a period that the shadow period will last well into September. I think early October is when Mars will exit its shadow. Okay, so really the period from now until early October is this Mars retrograde period. It's a reorganization of our action principle, how we go about making things happen in our lives, how we take action. And so Mars will actually be retrograding. The little lizard over here just kind of scared me a little bit. Hey, buddy. Don't get too friendly now. Always doing push-ups. All right. Anyway, I wanted to just talk about Mars, again, Mars retrograde. So it will officially go in its retrograde motion late June through late August. So it's a 2-month period of retrograde with the shadow starting here in early to mid-May, ending in early October. Okay, and it's going to retrograde from the sign of Aquarius back into Capricorn. And right now it's actually in the last couple degrees of Capricorn, just about to cross the threshold into Aquarius. Again, we're already in the shadow zone here of this Capricorn Aquarius. And while it's doing so, it's actually squaring Uranus. Okay, so Uranus, again, about to enter Taurus from the last degree of Aries. Mars about to enter Aquarius from the last degree of Capricorn. That's a 90-degree angle difference between those two. That's a square. And so this square, because Mars will be retrograding, is going to be in and out over the next several months through about September. So this period from May to September, really the whole summer period, we can call it, this is going to be a Mars squaring Uranus theme going on, with Mars in Aquarius squaring this fresh Uranus in Taurus. Okay, so it all ties back to, Uranus being in Aries the last 7 to 8 years, this Mercury retrograde in Aries that kind of finishes up that job, and now we have a shift of Uranus into a new sign, and it doesn't, in Mars enters a new sign and hangs out with Uranus in a sense from that square angle for several months to almost give Uranus a hand in its new sign, because Uranus in Taurus is not a natural expression of that planet's energy, whereas Aries was a very natural expression, or is a very natural expression. Uranus is very unpredictable. It's an unpredictable energy. It's a surprise energy. And Taurus is a sign to do with stability and predictability and comfort. That's a really big one for Taurus, is comfort and it's just simple sensual pleasure, just like eating and sleeping, and the simplicity of the human experience is really what Taurus is about. Okay, and so Uranus entering Taurus disrupts comfort. It disrupts simplicity. It makes the simple more complicated, or reveals the complications within the simplicity. Okay, and that can be a good thing. It's a stirred up kind of energy. And so with Mars in connection with Uranus crossing that threshold for the first few months of it, it kind of gives us a sense of taking it slowly, which is really aligned with Taurus and not so aligned with Uranus. It's kind of challenging us to maintain authenticity in this transition, so that we recognize that comfort and stability looks different to different people. And that's really what this Uranus and Taurus energy is about in general, is a whole new way of considering or perceiving stability, comfort, and pleasure. Okay? And so the last several years has allowed us to individuate enough where we can now sort of ground and manifest the lives in front of us in a way that reflects that truth, and isn't overly compromising in order to remain comfortable, okay? And so we're willing to take more risks with our basics in life, okay? Like where we live, you know, what we consider comforting and home and those kinds of things, okay? And so collectively, it's interesting. You know, I said the last time Uranus was in Taurus, mid-1930s to early 1940s, when that was occurring, Regulus was just entering the 29th degree of Leo. And I've talked about this in previous videos as well. Regulus being an energy associated with power structures. And when it was in Leo for the last 2,000 years, up until 2011, we had very imbalanced power structures, very, you know, might is right kind of standards and inequality, and, you know, hordes of resources in one area and lack in another, and this real sense of competition that drives how power is structured, okay? And when it entered the 29th degree of Leo, that amped up. And so that was in the late 1930s, which is right the last time Uranus was in Taurus. And so there was some, you know, reorganization. This is when essentially World War II was birthing, okay? It was a time period just prior to World War II and the birthing of it, okay? And you can see that Regulus at the 29th degree of Leo energy certainly present there. And with Uranus and Taurus, this was really there's a lot of disruption in what was comfortable. What, you know, what people assumed was reality and what they were passed down generation to generation was suddenly being disrupted completely, in many ways. In the US, we were coming out of the Depression, and you know, in Europe, it was basically, you know, things were getting reorganized on a daily basis. In the you know, South Pacific and whatnot, same thing. So there was a lot of upheaval in people's sense of comfort and safety and food availability and all of that kind of thing. And that was again happening when Regulus was in Leo, okay, 29th degree of Leo. So it's a different kind of energy. Now with Regulus in Virgo since 2011, it's still sitting there about 0 degrees Virgo. As Uranus enters Taurus here tomorrow, and it's going to again hover back and forth over that point until next spring, so spring of 2019. So for about a year almost, this Uranus will be in a trine, a nice pleasant 120 degree aspect to Regulus in Virgo. And a similar kind of thing happened when Saturn entered Capricorn. If you watched my video just before Christmas, Saturn entered Capricorn right around the winter solstice. And so when that passed by, it was also trining Regulus at 0 degrees Virgo from 0 degrees Capricorn. So now we have Uranus at 0 degrees Taurus trining Regulus at 0 degrees Virgo. And so there is sort of this grand trine energy happening that's bringing this Regulus in Virgo, which is still fresh. It's only been about 6-7 years or so of Regulus in Virgo. We've got about 2,000 left or so. It's kind of anchoring it in a way. And we've had the Saturn anchor, with Saturn entered Capricorn back in December, and now we're going to have this sort of year-long Uranian anchor, which it's interesting to think of Uranus as an anchor, because it's not that kind of energy, but it's in Taurus. And so it's more about anchoring in authentic, relevant, modern forms of power structures. And that including technology, right? That we're upgraded. We're not the same technological, or we're not at the same technological limits as the late 1930s or any time in the last 2,000 years. Right? We're in a different world. And how we structure our power is still in the old way, a Regulus in Leo kind of way. And I think with Saturn in Capricorn, Uranus now in Taurus, with Regulus in Virgo, there's a sort of grand trine of Earth energies of reforming power, reforming it to better reflect its technological capabilities of now. And this changes everything. You know, I've had discussions with people about this, and you know, just for example, you know, how the federal government is structured in the U.S. We have all these representatives that live in Washington, D.C. And we certainly have the capability technologically that they could all live in their districts and still interact quite easily. And that would leave them less susceptible to lobbyists that can collectively influence representatives, etc. And it would keep people in their areas of representation. Obviously, in 1776, or you know, late 1700s, or probably not until 1790s when it was conjured up. But the idea of having representatives and having them all in one place made sense with those technological capabilities. Now we can change that. So it's just one example, but you have to understand a lot of reform has to happen here, and a lot of reform is going to happen over the next several years. And so I see this period over the next couple of years, while Saturn's in Capricorn through 2020, and I've talked about this in previous videos, and with now Uranus in Taurus, this total restructuring of how we govern ourselves, and also in terms of values. So values and resources are going to be pretty big, and lots of rapid changes there. And so I think the first place people want to go with that is, you know, things like Bitcoin and whatnot, as far as like, you know, and these are examples of changes in our, you know, what we value, you know, going from physical money to electronic money, essentially. And that's one possibility. That's a big part, where that's probably going to be a part of it, not necessarily Bitcoin itself, but cryptocurrency and blockchain technology that it rests upon, because that blockchain technology can be used in other ways as well, not just in creating cryptocurrencies. And I think we're going to see major changes in the way that overall society is structured, and it could happen pretty rapidly over the next 10 years or so. And this Uranus and Taurus through 2026 is a big part of this, okay? So I think we may also see kind of revolutionized forms of food production, with like 3D printing, for example, revolutionized forms of house building that makes it much more affordable, and things like that. So we could see rapid changes, I think, with Uranus and Taurus in terms of food and shelter, the basics in life. And you might think, well, in the late 1930s, early 1940s, it was kind of the opposite. It was more of a negative effect. But that's when Regulus was in Leo. It was at the 29th degree of Leo. And so there was a lot of shaking up and release energy there. Here we're building for the next couple of millennia, building towards something. And like I see, like, you know, Uranus rules technology, and so adding technology into the basics, food, shelter, things like that, is going to be a big part of what we experience over the next 8 years or so. Okay, so and with Mars again squaring Uranus for the next 4 months or so until September as part of its retrograde, it'll also be in a sextile to Chiron in Aries, which just entered Aries in April, and I think I mentioned that in my previous video. We are definitely in a different energy this summer than we were last summer, for sure. Lots of changes have happened. Where, you know, Saturn is not in Sag anymore; it's in Capricorn. Uranus will be in Taurus, not Aries, and you know, Chiron will be in Aries instead of Pisces. Very different from where we were in the summer of 2017 here, in the summer of 2018, and going in line with this whole going our own way and relying on our own self-wisdom and self-counsel. We're there, and now with Mars entering Aquarius again tomorrow, with Uranus entering Taurus, this Mars retrograde is going to be all about really defining, now that we have our unique individuation, defining how we operate most efficiently in the world from that space. Not how we were taught, not how we were trained, but how we now have to interact with the world based on who we actually are, what we figured out by ourselves. Okay, and so that takes practice in trial and error, and that's what this summer is going to be about, is this practice in trial and error. Is how do I want to come across? How do I want to present myself now that I know myself? And doing this for the long term. So we're really trying to find, in other words, it's not a good idea to jump in. It's a good idea to play around with options here this summer, and by the fall we'll have a sense of where our lives are going to be heading over the next decade, really. So to think about it in those long-term perspectives rather than the short-term, because we're becoming sort of new people with a new approach, and we want to perfect our new approach by finding that ourselves. And with Chiron and Aries, there's a bit of a blind courage, a courageousness that doesn't care about pain. I mean, it's like accepting that it's there. And so that can help us move in directions we would never have tried, and to put ourselves out there in ways that might have mortified us in the past, but doing it anyway. So just taking that chance, taking that risk, putting ourselves out there. And all the while making sure we're not doing anything too far out of practical reality, okay? And that's the thing, it's got to be practical too, because that's really what this, having Saturn and Uranus in Earth signs at the same time, it's really a time of taking the practical and mixing it with authenticity in a way that is very useful, okay? And so on a personal level, that's again, reassessing where we're at personally, but on a collective level, this is related to the whole Regulus and Virgo shift in power, and coming up with practical ways to authentically govern and exchange resources and whatnot in a way that's up to date and modern with where we are now, and not just habits of how it's been, how we've organized government, how we've organized resources and whatnot. And so we're really in this really big change phase, and there's a lot more potential for things to ground in for the long haul, rather than in the past years. There's been a lot of kind of iffiness and unpredictability, and a sense that as soon as we get started with something, we get knocked off course. And so that's, and then feeling the pain of that and the vulnerability of that, and blaming ourselves, and and this energy is different. This energy is very much, one foot in front of the other. Let's see what works, let's see what doesn't work, and let's go with what works. And let's go with what works with the intention of it being long term. Okay? And so that's a big difference from even last year. Okay? So anyway, that I think is how I'll leave it. I don't know if that made any sense, or was too much information. That, I don't know. It seemed like it came through me without me thinking it over first, but just as a review, Uranus enters Taurus tomorrow. It will be in Taurus most of the next 8 years, with the exception of a few months here in the late fall, early spring. Mars is it just entered its retrograde shadow. It will retrograde late June to late August, and it'll exit its shadow in early October. And the whole time it's in that shadow, it will be in and out of a square to Uranus freshly in Taurus. So this is, again, this gradual transition into a new expression of that Uranian energy, that independent, eclectic, unpredictable energy in a new sign. And Mars will also be in a sextile to Chiron in Aries, which is that theme of going for it even if it hurts, or knowing that it will hurt, or will bring some things up. So anyway, it's a time to be brave and bold, but also practical and considerate of the long term. That's a key here. So as long as we are not neglecting our authenticity, again, this goes back to my last video, we're not neglecting the authenticity of our inner child, and we're utilizing it or channeling it into something practical, useful, and not just temporary, but long term. And then we're doing something beneficial for ourselves. So I will leave it at that. Thank you for joining me. If you have any questions, please let me know. I will be kind of in and out of town a little bit here in May. I'll be in Northern California most of June. Actually, I'll be back in the area where I started my astrology in Sacramento in mid-June for a few days. I'll be up there, and I'll be in other parts of Northern California as well. Yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. I will actually be doing a radio interview next week, May 25th, I believe, so about a week and a half from now. and I will probably post that. I'll probably put that audio together as a YouTube for everyone. That's something that'll come later if I get time to do that. But I will also probably put a link once I get. Actually, I will have a link, and I can put the link in this on the bottom of this video here, and you can click on that on the 25th and listen live to that interview. Anyway, hope all is well here as we start the summer season. Have a good Mars retrograde period. Figure out what works and what doesn't work. You know, don't be afraid to try new things, new ways that are reflective of your authentic nature, and embrace this Uranus and Taurus that's entering our space here over the next 7 or 8 years. As we release Uranus in Aries, it'll be nice to experience a new kind of stability, and that's really what this is about, a new kind of stability after we've experienced a sort of uproar within our inner nature. Now we've got to create the space, the real life circumstances to reflect that now. Okay, so have a good one, and we will talk to you later. Bye.